For the third year in a row, Louisiana is facing drought conditions. Brittle, dry land is the antithesis of agriculture, with many farmers frustrated over the lack of rain.
Those dry conditions are great for one thing, though: wildfires. TWILA's Josh Meeks takes a look at how one ranch north of Baton Rouge had a very close call.
Over here, the trees fell over here, and back behind us, there's no fence.
As a cattle rancher, Amelia Kent is quite dependent on fences.
I mean, this hits too close to home.
She's surveying the damage after a recent wildfire took out this section of fence, potentially putting her cattle in danger of escaping where they could wander into traffic.
We're quite fortunate in that the only damage we sustained was in the form of a fence row. We don't have the timber property that was primarily impacted by the fire. However, our pasture is adjacent to that timber property, and our perimeter fence was quite literally burned up for at least a stretch of at least a half mile.
The fires that took out her fence were two wildfires that merged into one. At least one of those blazes was ignited by a chain hanging from a truck.
Thankfully, the winds were mild and working against it. So this really is more just a wake-up call than a terrible event. Some timber properties impacted. We have a lot of dead trees as a result of last year's drought. So that coupled with our dry conditions right now is creating more of a tinderbox situation than we would typically have in a pine belt area.
Southeast Louisiana hasn't seen any substantial rainfall since Hurricane Francine. Dry conditions have triggered another drought, and coming off of 2023, that's something the new state climatologist is watching closely.
As everybody knows, hardly a drop of rain during the month of October anywhere in the state except for down in the extreme southeastern part of the coastal parishes. So for the most part, we're rolling into drought, not looking for any big changes anytime soon. And particularly in northern and western Louisiana, things are getting pretty critical there in terms of moisture shortage.
You can't make rain, but you can devote more resources to study it so that farmers and ranchers facing drought conditions can get emergency aid in a more timely manner.
We've got a team now, drought monitor teams composed of about a half a dozen people, includes both federal, local, and academic input. And keep in mind that the definition of drought changes depending on who you talk to. So it's not an easy solution. It's not simply a matter as rainfall up or below normal. And so we're looking at a variety of different parameters to analyze it. We're doing a better job of tracking all of those weather elements. So we believe that the drought monitor is much more timely, much more up to date than it had been in the last two summer and fall seasons.
In the meantime, folks like Amelia Kent will have to rely on the hard work of state and local firefighters, as well as fire prevention crews with the Department of Agriculture.
Quite thankful. My daughter and I left this property at 7:30 last night, and where we're standing at Department of Ag, Dozer was still patrolling and working on this area from a preventative and containment standpoint. Not that the fire was out of control, but preparing and controlling for any flare-ups overnight.
Reporting from north of Baton Rouge for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, I'm Josh Meeks.
Kent says her neighbors were the first to arrive and help get the fire under control, and she's thankful they were there. The rest of the fence will have to come down before it can be rebuilt. Kent says her anxiety over the rest of her fields will stay high until they get a thorough drenching.
Jay Grimes was also recently on an episode of the Farm Bureau podcast, talking with Agriculture and Forestry Commissioner Dr. Mike Strain. Strain says many farmers are still battling the aftermath of last year's record drought.
Like with crawfish, that'll take several years. That is not something you can do in 1 year, because we have to reestablish those crawfish in more than 100,000 acres, reestablish them in the wild population in the basin. But then again, it takes several years to reestablish that. And so our farmers took a pretty big lick last year.
You can listen to Commissioner Strain and state climatologist Jay Grimes' full episode on the drought right now, wherever you get your podcast.